Hi, this is Dave Michaels. Welcome to Talking Points. Today I've got a video guest, Dean Bubbly. Hello, Dean.
Hi, Dave.
Thank you for joining me at this late hour in the UK. Are you in London? Are you in London?
Yeah, I'm based in central London.
Based in central London. So the reason I reached out to Dean today is because I was really surprised. I've been watching Mobile World Congress, and I was surprised because some of the news, some of the big headlines were involving RCS. This is a messaging standard from, I think, 1920s or 1930s, something like that. And I was really surprised. I didn't think that it had much of a future, but after reading everything that came out last week, I feel really optimistic that it does have a future, that Google is responding to pressures from Apple, that the carriers are responding from pressures from WeChat and Facebook, and everything's kind of coming together in this announcement. You've got Nexmo from Vonage involved, and there's just a lot of moving parts. So I said, this looks great. I'm so excited. RCS has finally arrived because I was waiting for it when I was a child. And so I thought that I would write a post about how great this is, and then I kind of realized I don't know that a whole lot about RCS. So I decided instead to reach out to Dean, who is more or less the industry spokesman for all things obsolete, or just some things, Dean. I'm just teasing you. No, for certainly for RCS. I know you've been. And so Dean, let's get started off here. Let's set the tone right away. Are you super excited, like I am, about all this RCS news? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, great. I mean, it gets me an awful lot of opportunity to tell everyone why to avoid it. And I get to accuse it of being a zombie technology because it's dead but still walking around and trying to eat people's brains.
Wow. Okay. All right. So we started off pretty clear here. So let me. What I like about it. Tell me. Let me start off with what's good about it. I guess we should probably just recap the news a little bit. The recap basically is that SMS has been around for a long time. It's one of the three universal mechanisms we have for communicating, the other two being PSTN and email. All three of these things work pretty much regardless of what carrier or client or whatever you happen to use, what brand of cell phone you happen to use. And they're all fairly universal. That's a pretty powerful thing. SMS in particular is becoming a little obsolete. It's just plain old text. It's limited in how long the messages can go. It doesn't have very good threading, although some of the clients have solved that. But it's pretty old technology. Now, what Google did is they said, let's take this old standard and figure out how to, what would be the word, make it a consistent implementation. Let's make it, because Google's not a standards body. They basically just took a consistent or best practice, and they've lined up a whole bunch of carriers to say, we'll support it. That sounds like a good thing. Isn't that a good thing?
Well, what Google actually did was it acquired a company called Jibe.
About a year ago, right?
Yeah, a year and a bit ago, which was a provider of RCS clients and infrastructure as a service. Bear in mind, RCS itself is 10 years old. Yeah, and it's based on IMS as a carrier communication application standard, which is also getting on for 20 years old in conception. So it is. It's been positioned in many different ways. I've been following it since day one, pretty much, RCS, and it's gone through so many attempts to be reborn or dig itself out of the grave, depending on how you want to put it. And the idea is that it's either, depending on who you speak to at what point in that cycle, an upgraded version of SMS. It's a way to, quote, beat the internet, or OTT, a term I hate, companies. It's come in multiple different versions. It's had very few use cases, despite actually having quite a few launches in places like Spain and Korea and across Europe. Even in the US, I think Metro PCS had it when T-Mobile bought them. And it's essentially gone nowhere. RCS, I tend to think of it as more of a facelifted version of MMS than SMS. And it's
Can you kind of hit the three? What would you say the key differences are between SMS, MMS, and RCS? Is it
right. Well, firstly, it's ubiquity of usage and its user behavior. Actually, there's one other thing that is worth pointing out. SMS actually has in some jurisdictions, it has some regulated rules around it as well. So things like advice of charge when you're roaming uses SMS. Yeah, there are a variety of things like that where SMS now is part of the legal framework as well as and telecom regulatory framework as well as user behavior. Yeah, it's integrated into every cellular device. People are used to working with SMS in terms of both sending and receiving messages. They know what the costs are, whether that's included in a bundle, typically if you've got a postpaid plan, or if you're a pay-as-you-go user, as something like 2/3 of the world's mobile users are, you know how much it costs. Yeah, and so you've got a fairly good handle on its capabilities, its costs. The other thing is that SMS tends to get used for a lot of other functions, such as sending URLs, so you can fire up a web page. It's possible to send a link to an app store to download an app, so it can trigger a bunch of other events as well. Yeah, in much the same way this video call was triggered by you sending me a URL via Skype, ironically. So SMS is well used and liked. It's used in machine to machine for various applications. Quite often the internal updates for the phone itself, things like the roaming partners or some of the internal over-the-air updates are sent via SMS as a carrier. So that's sort of, if you like, part of the infrastructure, not just of the way that consumers communicate, but also app developers and so forth. It's used for increasingly for two-factor authentication, and it's triggered most notably via the phone number as the identifier. And there's an interesting debate to have as to whether the phone number and phone book has limitations on terms of use cases, say, for example, around social communications.
Okay, so Google's kind of published a best practice implementation. They've lined up a number of carriers. They've released a new version of Android. They call it Messenger. Now it's called Android Messenger, to support RCS in case your Android phone doesn't get updates. So they've created the app. They've got a huge installed base with Android devices, which of course will take some time for it to reach. They've got carriers.
Well, Google has carriers, but actually it's worth pointing out the role of the GSMA, the Association of Mobile Industry Operators, or Mobile Operators, because actually, you know, Google is not the only provider of RCS back-end infrastructure or clients for devices. A number of carriers have their own infrastructure. Samsung bought another company called NewNet, which does something very similar, and they're setting up their own hub for RCS. There's a number of other third-party providers that have been around doing this sort of as a cloud service for some amount of time with moderate degrees of success. So there's a number of back-end providers, and a number of carriers will probably want to run their own infrastructure rather than have Google running it for them. So
yeah, but I guess that's kind of the
this is the GSMA show.
But that's the problem, and that's the Google solution, right? Because the problem is there's so many ways to implement this that it's incompatible. And so what Google is basically doing is saying, let's take a best practice. We're going to publish a best practice, and to make it all worthwhile, we're going to handle the devices, so the devices get the Android client, and we're going to make it so that programmatic control through Nexmo. So we've got the supply, demand, the mechanism, infrastructure. So Google, because again, Google's not a standards body. I mean, their interest is to have something competitive to iMessage or iMessenger, whatever Apple calls it, which is an interesting question. But so Google's kind of what they've really done, in my opinion, which is so exciting, is they've basically torn down the barriers for the carriers. the carriers now could just follow Google's prescribed solution as opposed to thinking about it.
But the prescribed solution isn't new. The GSMA's done it for years, and I think you've got it the wrong way around. That Google isn't driving this; it's GSMA that is, and Google has its own agenda. Google has a whole host of different messaging products, and it sees this as a possibility, as a way to replicate what iMessage has done on iPhone. It's one of the things in their arsenal. Now, possibly, they also see this as a possibility that they might, in the long term, be able to turn the messaging application into a center for commerce and chatbots and maybe AI as well. But that's a long way in the future. And the issue here is that there are divergent requirements between the service provider community and Google. Ultimately, the operators want to try and make money from messaging. Don't forget, they detested iMessage when it first came out, because when you were messaging between two iPhones, you weren't using the SMS infrastructure, and that was part of what contributed to SMS's downfall in terms of revenues, as well as WhatsApp and WeChat. And so Google wants its own iMessage, and it's found sort of the carriers as and implicitly the GSMA as useful partners in helping it achieve that. Now, let's see how long the mutual overlap in requirements and upside comes. My view is that from Google's point of view, this is fairly low risk. Google's gone through enough messaging iterations in the past, and still has most of them, that if this doesn't necessarily fly as well as it is hoped, its relative exposure is low. And so, whereas its upside is significant, and it can always pivot back. It's also up to the OEMs, its part licensees, as to whether they actually implement all of this, and also is up to the user to decide how they want to deal with messaging on their device. I mean, they're able to make choices as well, not either in terms of what they install, but certainly in terms of what they use. And there's a really important thing here in terms of the reach that this can have and over what time. Whilst this may apply to new devices, they need to be, the existing users of Android devices need to be persuaded to install the update or download the specific app, and then they need to be persuaded to use it. And whilst in some countries which are predominantly Android driven, you may find that it's sort of an emergent behavior in the same way that iMessage was for iPhones. But in countries which are, let's say, 50-50 or 30-70 either way, iOS to Android, the general sort of common platform usage between those people tends to be some combination of WhatsApp, Facebook, WeChat, Line, and a few other apps, depending where you are in the world. For what I'll call generic messaging, which is sort of basic messaging of, I'm in the taxi, I'll be with you in 10 minutes type stuff. And then there's a whole host of other messaging use cases which are much more dependent on particular purposes and demographics. So if you want to appear to be cool with your friends, in your teenager, you might use Snapchat. If you're interested in security and encryption, you use Signal or Telegram. If it's messaging relating to, say, a social event, let's say I'm organizing a birthday party or an event, I might message people about the event on Facebook because it's all nicely integrated. There are some messaging environments where you don't want to use a phone number for identifier, certainly something like, say, Tinder. Equally, you don't want to federate messaging between all these different apps. I mean, I don't think a Tinder LinkedIn messaging interface is necessarily a desirable one.
Okay. So let me go back to one of the earlier points, which was that SMS is this universal mechanism, and what is happening, in my opinion, is that Google or perhaps it's this other consortium is trying to position RCS as a successor to SMS. Now, SMS's key benefit in the world is its universality, where it works across all devices. So so when I read about Android Messenger, I downloaded it, put it on my phone, and lo and behold, I don't have RCS. And so my assumption is I don't have RCS because T-Mobile is not yet supporting it. And so is it fair to say that once T-Mobile starts supporting it and Google has it, and then I'm ready to go, that any iPhone user on T-Mobile will also automatically have RCS, or is this a non? Are we going to lose the universal benefit of SMS with Google's version of RCS?
No, it's always true. It's always dangerous trying to second guess what Apple's going to do next. There is a possibility that Apple will surprise people and say, "Yeah, okay, we'll support this too." I mean, they supported voice over LTE, which took them a little while, but got around to it. In this case, I would be surprised, but as I say, it's possible to be surprised with Apple. And if it does, and if Apple did support RCS, it would be offered as an option. There's no way that they're going to kill off iMessage and turn it into RCS. Equally, I don't think that there's any reason they would necessarily want to make iMessage interoperate with its Android equivalent. I mean, to some extent, you could say it comes down to who does Apple want to annoy more, Google or Facebook? Because if Apple supported RCS, the biggest fallout would be to WhatsApp, whereas if at the moment iMessage is a sort of an island between iPhone users, it tends to get used, but I don't think Apple monetizes it especially. It's just a sort of a nice to have. There have been various signs over time that Apple wanted to do something a little bit cuter and cooler with iMessage. And it certainly does have a few nice features occasionally that pop up, but I don't think it's as strategic as this objective would seem to suggest. So then you have this paradox that some countries have a mix of Android and iOS, and in those countries, if you like, the lowest common denominator is usually WhatsApp, Facebook, or WeChat. And then there's a long tail of Snapchat and Instagram and Telegram for particular applications, or increasingly there's in-app messaging as well.
Right.
It doesn't matter whether you're playing Scrabble or if you're using LinkedIn, everything's got its own messaging capability these days. Then there's the sort of B2C angle of, so if I'm a train company sending tickets to people, I know that there's this idea that RCS will, once it miraculously becomes adopted, supposedly is going to be this quite messaging as a platform idea, which is something that WeChat has done successfully in China, and which Facebook has had varying success or not that much success so far. And the issue I have there is that it's trying to put the cart before the horse. There has never been a successful technology platform that was not first a successful technology product. So RCS, its problem has always been that it needs to, if it's going to gain ubiquity, it's going to have to earn it, not impose it. And whenever I look at what either Google or GSMA try to do, is they're trying to sort of force RCS into the market, rather than let it, seed it, let it grow, see what happens when people use it, learn from actual real world experience, iterate, and expect there to be emergent properties. And so, trying to sort of say, well, we'll turn it into a way of delivering mobile ticketing before anyone's actually worked out what it's for, seems to be arrogant, frankly.
Arrogant. All right. Well, on that note of arrogance, I think we'll wrap it up here. I'm going to put in this video below here, I'm going to put a link to one of Dean's posts on RCS, so you can get his full opinions on this stuff. And I think it's interesting times we live in, and it's interesting that this technology won't go away. Maybe that means that it's hasn't been ready yet, or maybe it just means it'll never come. We'll see.
As I say, I mean, the thing to compare it to is MMS, not SMS.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, thank you very much, Dean. I know it's late for you. You've got to get to your tea and crumpets and all that stuff that you do. Say hi to the Queen for us, and we'll see you soon.
Cheers. Bye.
All right, thank you.